Hey guys, how's it going? We are gonna get through the rest of the notes this week. So it'll be a nice little shorter lecture today, and then starting next week, we're gonna have full hour or full lectures that will be over an hour for sure, and you'll have the whole week to watch them. But we held our first Zoom meeting class this Thursday during our normal class time, and if you weren't able to make it because it was maybe a little short notice, just know we're going to be meeting on Zoom at our normal class times every Thursday. We're going to meet once a week just so I can check in on you guys, see if you have any questions, clarify anything, whether it's on a test or an assignment or a lecture. And the way it's going to work is instead of doing a day-by-day checklist, I'm going to post a week-by-week checklist, and it will have everything that's due that Thursday night at midnight. So in the week-by-week checklist, an example it'll look like a lecture, a discussion board, a quiz if we have one, and an assignment or something of that nature. And you'll get it on Monday. It'll be available. You will have Thursday till midnight to turn it all in at 11:59 p.m. And you can email me all week. You can do it all on Monday. You can split it up. It is up to you guys to get it done by Thursday at midnight. And we're going to meet Thursday on Zoom. I've been sending emails out about that. So if you're not getting those emails, you need to email me from the email that's best to email you at. So you can get that. That's a confusing sentence. But so make sure you're getting into these Zoom classes on Thursdays just so I can check in with you, know you're still alive, know you're still participating. Make sure you're turning in your work and all that good stuff. One thing I want to make sure that we are doing is that third period U.S. history. A lot of you guys have done this, but not everybody. We were all in this history, U.S. history. I now made that for just 6th period because everybody was turning in the same stuff and it was too much. You guys are now in this U.S. history 3rd period. If you guys have not gone on to Moodle and enrolled in the new Bronson U.S. history 3rd period, you need to do so ASAP. Is it here? No. There's a way I can see how many people are in it. More. Users. Enrolled users. So there's only 16 of you guys in here, which I know is not everybody. So you guys need to get into this course and make sure that you are in the correct one to submit work on Thursday, because all like 50 of you guys in my U.S. histories were shoving it into just this one course, and it was just too much. So we're going to get started on the notes. U.S. history, 3rd period, you need to enroll in a new class. And then U.S. history 6th period, you stay the same. AP U.S. history, you're also staying the same. Yeesh. I don't think I have anything else to say before we get started. All right, one thing I do want to mention though is I have figured out why some people are having problems with watching the YouTube videos. It's giving people problems if they're watching them from their school computer, which I know sucks. It's something with YouTube and not marking the videos safe because there's too many videos being uploaded right now from teachers that they're not checking them all, and our school laptops won't play things that aren't considered safe, I guess. So if you watch it from a cell phone or a different laptop, it will work for you. All right, excuse me. All right. Yes, let's get started here. All right. We got through all these notes here. Modernism. We talked about Scopes monkey trial. We talked about the increase into prohibition, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, temperance unions, women get the right to vote. All these changes that were fundamentally changing where America was headed. What direction were we going to stay? Were we going to stay on the course with tradition and teaching religion in schools, or were we going to switch it up and go with modernism and change kind of the fabric of the United States? And so that's more of this lesson today. We're going to start with society and change. Society and change. What was changing besides the things you know with the flappers and the short skirts and the short hair and the girls smoking cigarettes and people going to the movies and all of these different things, what else is changing? One thing is high school enrollment increases. Um, these jobs and the competition for jobs was becoming greater, so it no longer just qualified you to be a 6-year-old boy that could stick your arm in a gear machine, right? In some sort of machine. You had to have an education to be able to offer more to the employer than just your hard labor in some jobs, right? Some jobs, that was all they needed. And in some jobs, they needed people who could be more innovative and be more educated. So it required more education, so people had to graduate high school. Um, Sorry, excuse me. And also the economy was prospering. In the 1930s, the economy is booming. Or excuse me, in the 1920s, the economy is booming. People don't have to work. Kids don't have to work, right? The mom and the dad may both have a job which is supplying more than enough money for the household. And so children don't have to work on the farms as much, right? We're moving urbanization, we're moving to the inner cities. So kids don't have to work on the farm as much, right? So what are they going to do with their free time? They're going to go to school and finish high school. Sports become a form of entertainment, and we get some very famous and influential pop culture icons, right? Babe Ruth, the great Bambino in baseball, Red Grange, Newt Rockne. Red Grange, maybe the first NFL superstar, if you will, to ever play the game. Newt Rockne was a collegiate football player who took the U.S. by storm. Jack Dempsey, a very famous boxer, a little bit before the time of our man, Cinderella Man, but in the same aspect of people tuned in to watch this person perform. They would bet money on them. They'd get together and throw parties to watch. It became pop culture, which today drives our society in some ways, right? Especially drives teenagers and social media, is the idea of being like some sort of influencer. And obviously that term has a different meaning today of being an influencer, social media influencer. But these people, that's what they would do. They were influencing society. So the way Babe Ruth acted, or what he drank, or if he smoked, or the language he chose to use, changed society. Because we were having people in a position that we had never seen before. And think about your biggest influences, right? Who is the person that influences your fashion choice? Who's the person that influences... What's up? Sorry. Who's the person that influences your... what you're choosing to do? And without that person, your style or your choice of athletics or how you play the game or whatever it is you choose to do may not be the same. And so these were the first kind of pop culture icons that people started to follow and listen and change their everyday life to become like that person or to imitate that person. So very, very big change in society because we had these pop culture icons that were popping out, right? And we've talked about these types of influencers don't come unless people can purchase their product, right? Babe Ruth doesn't have a job. Charlie Chaplin, the movie star, doesn't have a job if people aren't going to see that form of entertainment. If they're not going to the movies, if they're not going to baseball games, then these people don't matter, right? They have no one that's purchasing their product. They don't have a job. And so the reason that people are able to purchase these products is because of the money that's going around the United States, right? The solid economy, the women having jobs as well. So all of this is contributing to society being able to change. All right. So motion pictures, sports, pop culture, all becoming a big part of the new United States that is forming out of this argument of tradition or modernism. Another very important thing is the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance Harlem is a section of New York City that is predominantly African American, certainly in the 1920s, and it was kind of seen as the center of intellect and culture for African Americans. Their literature, music, drama, all of it came out of the Harlem area, and in this in this area, the African Americans were extraordinarily successful in anything they were doing, whether it was literature, music, drama, any other type of art. But around the United States, they really didn't get the recognition that maybe they deserved because they were African Americans. And so the Harlem Renaissance helped break down those barriers, right? It broke down the barriers amongst Americans that art is art, right? Potential and entertainment is entertainment. It didn't matter if it was coming from someone who's African American or not. If you guys have seen the movie The Green Book or something, that type of situation is representative of the Harlem Renaissance, but it was coming directly out of Harlem. And it kind of led the charge in pushing for African Americans to be seen as equals in art and in entertainment because they were performing or creating just as much and just as new things for culture and society as white people. Men like Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford become larger than life. Wealthy, famous people, inspired people, and push people to push the limits, find a way to be successful. Henry Ford, you guys know of, Ford Motor Company, right? If you've seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari, all of those, you know who Henry Ford is, created or attributed with creating the first purchased on a large scale automobile. But Charles Lindbergh is a story that I like to tell. Charles Lindbergh is a very, very interesting man. He flew planes. Well, he was kind of a daredevil. He did a lot more than just fly planes. He did other things like, almost like think Harry Houdini, tried to escape things. He broke a lot of bones, scared a lot of people from life-threatening tricks and events, and I don't know what word I'm trying to think of. But one thing Charles Lindbergh did is he decided he was going to be the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, but that had already been done before. So he said, I'll be the first person to do it solo. No one had ever flown a plane from New York to Paris, ever, solo, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean by himself. So he sets out in his plane. His plane was called the Spirit of St. Louis. And Charles Lindbergh was already pretty famous at the time, but he jumped in a 33-and-a-half-hour journey, just him and his plane, from New York to Paris. Halfway through the flight, Charles Lindbergh's very tired. The plane, if you look it up, is very interesting. It actually doesn't have a windshield, which is really weird. It did have some windows he could open up, and he said that about halfway through, he was getting really, really tired. So he opened up the windows, and he was basically skating across the water. So he thought the water would splash him in the face and be really cold and keep him awake. And so he also experienced hallucinations and saw mirages, and he was really losing his mind. The journey itself was 33 and a half hours, but they said he was probably awake for nearly 48 hours, 2 days straight, at least preparing for the flight. And so when Charles Lindbergh gets back to the United States, he is met by a huge parade. I mean, like whenever an NBA team wins the NBA championship, parade. Thousands of people, everybody there for one purpose, to celebrate Charles Lindbergh. And he becomes probably the most famous person in the United States, Charles Lindbergh. And tragedy strikes his family as his 20-month-old son, so less than 2 years old, is kidnapped from their home. Charles Lindbergh Jr. He's kidnapped from their home in New Jersey. And the way they did it, somebody just literally put a ladder up to the second story where Charles Lindbergh Jr. was sleeping, climbed up the ladder, took the baby out of the crib, crawled back down the ladder, kidnapped him. And they wrote really mysterious letters to the Lindbergh family and Charles Lindbergh demanding a ransom be paid to get their baby back because they knew how famous and rich Charles Lindbergh was. And it became a national news story. I mean, this thing would be all over every front page newspaper. It'd be trending on Twitter like you wouldn't believe. It was huge, huge, huge news. It was covered by everybody that could cover it. So much so, people, other famous celebrities and people were offering money and help to Charles Lindbergh. Even Al Capone offered a $10,000 reward for information that led to the capture of the person who stole Charles or kidnapped Charles Lindbergh's child. So it was a huge news story, and unfortunately for Charles Lindbergh, it ends in tragedy when a few months later they find the baby's body murdered a few miles away from their home. Charles Lindbergh never even gets the opportunity to pay the person back. They kill the baby and they leave him basically in a park a few miles away from the home, and that's tragedy, right? And that just speaks to this idea of pop culture icons and people who are famous, where their life is put in a spotlight, and everybody knows everything about them, right? Everybody knows where they live, or what their where their favorite place to eat dinner is, and that all started in the 1920s, and obviously is carried on pretty strongly into today. So a lot of controversy in the 1920s when you have such success and people being rich and doing things. It creates controversy, and some of those controversies are big ones like communism versus capitalism, and some of them are a little bit smaller. Like, should women be able to wear skirts in public or not, right? And so we've talked about some of these controversies between Scopus monkey trial and evolution, and pop culture icons and celebrity, and now the idea of communism. Right, the idea of communism versus capitalism and the impact it's had on America has been pretty significant since its inception. In Russia, when the Bolshevik Revolution happens, and Russia drops out of World War I. They have their own little revolution. They continue to revolt, and eventually communism comes out on top. So America has a capitalist society where we have basically a free market economy, right, that drives the economy. That's small businesses. It's people creating their own product and putting it out for people to purchase. And if people don't purchase their product, their business will fail. If people do purchase their product, that person and that business will become successful and rich. And so what drives the free market is competition, right? It's if say for instance, if McDonald's was the only place that made hamburgers, right? The beginning, they made hamburgers, people loved them, they bought them. Everybody's buying McDonald's. Well, if McDonald's was the only place you could buy a hamburger, they could charge you $500 for a hamburger because it's the only place you're going to get one, right? Of course, the market drives business, so if nobody would buy it for $500, right? So McDonald's was shut down, or they'd lower their price, right? And it's all about supply and demand. They could charge more than a traditional burger because they're the only burger. However, they couldn't overcharge, or else people wouldn't buy it. So what happens is then Burger King comes in and makes a burger. And Burger King knows that McDonald's is charging $10 for a burger when they could be charging $8. So Burger King makes a burger and charges $8. Well, then you have competition. Then you have a choice, right? Who are you going to choose? Burger King, McDonald's? McDonald's is $2 more, but is it better? Whatever it may be. That's kind of this really brief idea of capitalism. And then there's communism, where communism it stresses the rights of the government over the rights of individual people. So one political party, there's no options. You don't get to choose what you want to do. The government chooses. And so basically that is kind of the idea of socialism in some aspects, where communism cannot exist unless it goes through stages of socialism. I know we talk about communism a lot, but there's never been a true communist country in the aspect of what like Karl Marx was envisioning when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. But everything is done for the common good of the government. There's nobody owns land. Nobody owns almost anything. There's no private property. The government owns it all. And what happens is, person A makes, say, let's just talk about like corn, right? Ears of corn. Person A, B, and C are all corn farmers. Okay, they have to make corn. Person A has a great season. They get 50 ears of corn. Wow, right? So much corn. Person B decides that they don't want to farm this corn season, so they make 0, right? And then person C tries but doesn't have a great season, and they make 10 ears of corn. Okay, so we have 60 ears of corn between the three corn farmers. They will basically give all of their goods and services, whatever it may be, to the government. The government will take 60 ears of corn. The government will say, how much ears of corn do we need to make sure the government is successful? Right? They'll take everything. If they need 60, then they get 60 and the people get 0 ears of corn. Now say they need 30, right? They need 30 ears of corn and they're going to sell it for money, right? They're going to take that corn, sell it to a different country. Now they have money, okay? So what they have is 30 ears of corn left over. And what they do is they're going to split that amongst the three farmers or the people, right? And so person A, B, and C all get 10 ears of corn. And that makes 10, 20, 30. Now that seems great. Everybody has the same. The problem is person A, what differs from capitalism, right, is person A made 50 of those 60 ears of corn. Right? So they're getting 20 ears of corn less than they worked for. Person B is getting the same amount as person A. Right? The person B didn't do any work. They made 0 ears of corn. They're getting 10 still. And person C is also getting 10. And how many did they contribute? 10. So they got back what they put in. Right? So person B is probably elated and thrilled. Person C is probably, whatever. And person A is angry. Now, that's in true communism. In true communism, the government is basically doesn't exist. The government doesn't need anything from the people to exist. It is perfect. It's full, and it takes what it needs, but it's very, very minimal. And what it can give back is, right, say you put 60 ears of corn in, or 60 ears of corn in. The government only needs 1. So it has 59 to spread out, and it spreads it out amongst the people, and everybody's rich, right? That's what everybody thought, is after a certain amount of years, the government would fix itself, and then everybody would be rich because the government would be kicking back so much extra. We've never seen it get to that point. We've only seen it get to the point where the government is taking 80, 90% of profits and not giving back to the people. But the appeal in communism is the fact that it could work out perfectly and everybody's rich and equal, right? But either way, communism was a threat to an American dream, right? The American dream was that you could come to the United States, work your butt off, the United States, LOL, work your butt off and become wealthy, right? You could be person A. You could find out the formula. You could do the science. You could innovate, whatever it may be, and you could find a way to grow double or triple more than anyone else. And then you would get double or triple more than the profits. So it was a threat to the American dream. And more than that, it threatened just the way America wanted to present itself, the way it wanted to interact in the world. And the scary part was how quickly the rest of the world started to turn to communism, because it was this brand new idea that Russia was trying, and the other countries said, hey, if this works out, we better get on it now. We better get on board quick. So with the economy, Europe was struggling due to World War I. Europe was struggling, and so more and more countries turned to communism. And there was a large fear that it would spread to like England or the United States, which hits really close to home for the United States. The one person who really stepped up and led an attack on communism was Mitchell Palmer. He led what was called Palmer raids, where he basically hunted down, FBI style, hunted down people who were suspected radicals, socialists, communists, and anarchists, and he would arrest them, right? And it kind of led to this almost Salem witch trial aspect where, how do you know somebody is a socialist? You don't, right? They don't look a certain way. So that led to a lot of problems, and it didn't help the panic and paranoia that was spreading throughout the United States pretty rapidly at this point. Mitchell Palmer raids, all right? All right. Controversy as well. The KKK has a large revival in the 1900s, 1915. By 1924, 9 years later, over 500,000 members. Oh. Over over 500,000 people will claim to be part of the KKK, and it's still native-born white males who make up the KKK, and they felt threatened by urban changes in American society. Um, how cities were changing America, because we were having this shift, right? This whole thing's about society and changes and shifting. We were having this very very long, obvious obvious shift in society among America, where we were going from this traditional, agricultural farm boys, kids staying home from school to work on the farm, to cities. And in those cities, we had an uptick in crime. We had an uptick in African Americans living with white people, right, in the city. We had an uptick in entertainment, which you can imagine led to people staying out later, right, and dressing up and acting a certain way at those entertainment venues, and those entertainment venues expanding into, burlesque shows or whatever it may be, and just people not focusing on their own farm because no one lived within acres of them, right? But they had to dress a certain way, drive a certain car, look a certain way, speak a certain way to stand out or to be new or hip or whatever it was at the time. So huge changes. And the KKK adamantly resisted that change. And they did it in violent ways, and they did it in traditional KKK ways. The Ku Klux Klan, strong revival, nearly over 500,000 members in the 1920s. Another major thing here was Sacco and Vanzetti. And what Sacco and Vanzetti stand is American view on immigration at the time. All right, immigrants were still seen as seen in a pretty negative light in the United States. Even if they were from Italy, England, anywhere in Western Europe, they still weren't necessarily seen as welcomed in the United States. So Sacco and Vanzetti were two men who find themselves in the face of controversy. All right, they were two Italian immigrants who were self-proclaimed radicals, anarchists. They wanted chaos to reign. All right, they didn't necessarily like capitalism. They liked the United States, but didn't like the way it was run. They were kind of these rabble-rousing troublemakers. All right, and so Sacco and Vanzetti were arrested for a payroll robbery, right? And in the payroll robbery, two or one is what I'm trying to remember. I know that one guard was murdered for sure. I think just the guard was murdered. But so there was a robbery at basically they were transferring all the money out of the bank into a armed truck, and two men robbed this guard, and one of the guards was killed, and a lot of money was stolen, and so over $15,000 at the time. Sacco and Vanzetti were nearby when this robbery occurred, and so they were brought in, questioned, and arrested for the payroll robbery with circumstantial evidence. And this became one of the most, just like the John Scopes trial, it became a worldwide event. Newspapers, media outlets all focused in on it. They watched, they wrote about it, they took pictures, they interviewed, they did the whole 9 yards with Sacco and Vanzetti. And the evidence was very circumstantial. There was nothing that tied them to the actual to the murder. The biggest thing was there was a witness who said, yeah, I saw two guys who looked suspicious, and I'm pretty sure they were Italian. And those were the two Italians who lived close. So when they got Sacco and Vanzetti and they looked at their records, they had been anarchists before. They were under threat of being deported because they had been arrested before. They had both dodged the army draft. They both had firearms on their bodies when they were arrested. They lied on their statements when they were arrested. So, but none of it was circumstantial. And they never found any of the 15 grand that they stole. And so it was very questionable. And on top of all those things, they were Italians. And so if you had to blame somebody, it was easy to blame the immigrants, the Italians. And so it really was this piece on how does America view and treat its immigrants? Um, are they being defended rightfully and equally? A lot of questions were asked on this idea and this event of Sacco and Vanzetti. They were found guilty. Um, and they were sentenced to death by electric chair. They were both killed in the electric chair, and it symbolized the fear and hatred of immigrants in the United States. Now, with more technology, kind of like the USS Maine, we found that in 1961, they were able to use ballistics evidence, and they found that the pistol on Sacco had been used to murder the guard. So a lot of people think it was Sacco and Vanzetti or Sacco and somebody else. So it's this very eerie situation of, these Italian immigrants were murdered because they were Italian and tied to the crime very loosely, whereas you're supposed to have shadow of a doubt evidence. But in the 60s, they found that Sacco's gun was used to kill the guard conclusively. So we're not really sure what happened, but even no matter what the outcome was, it symbolized the fear and hatred of immigrants in the United States. The nation attempts to return to normalcy in the 1920s, right? Because we had just gotten out of this. So we just gotten out of World War One. World War One was an out of place event for the United States. Right, we were trying our best to stay isolated. We had done our imperialistic stuff. We got our land. We wanted to focus on ourselves. But World War One pulled us out of that. And now in the 1920s, President Warren G. Harding wants to bring us back to a place of normalcy. Domestically, which means at home in the United States, the government stays out of business. Right, that's capitalism. We let the market do its thing. We let the people drive the economy. Whatever happens. And foreign plan, isolation. We want to stay ourselves. However, Warren Harding's administration, just like Ulysses S. Grant, plagued by scandals. Both presidents in our last two major wars coming into the position of president, plagued by scandal. And why is that? We don't really know, but it may be because people trying to pull the rug out of under the wool over the United States' eyes after a major event. Warren Harding's is called the Teapot Dome Scandal, and it involved Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall. Albert Fall was charged with accepting bribes from oil companies in exchange for exclusive rights to drill for oil on federal land. So the government hands out like contracts or something, like the oil company says, we'll dig for oil. It's going to cost us this much. If we make this much, we'll give you X amount, whatever. And Albert Fall was taking bribes to give it to the oil company. So whichever company paid him the most, he would give the job to. Which is a big no-no, and it made Warren G. Harding's presidency look weak. And it kind of added to the chaos of the 1920s, right? The 1920s, if you've watched The Gatsby, is kind of loud, it's flamboyant, there's colors, there's parties, there's alcohol, and on top of it, we have these huge chaotic shifts in culture and society and change in the United States. And now not even the presidency can stay normalized, right? It adds to the chaotic nature and feeling of just the world in the United States scope. And so Warren Harding begins to realize his administration is corrupt. He basically becomes extraordinarily depressed as president, and he spends the next 2.5-3 years doing nothing. A very interesting time for the presidency. I just almost spilled my water everywhere. Holy cow. Good thing I didn't. He actually eventually dies in office. He dies of a heart attack. He doesn't die of depression or anything like that, but he does die of a heart attack, partially because people think due to his depressive symptoms, he wasn't eating the healthiest. So maybe there is a tie there. He's replaced by Calvin Coolidge in 1923. Coolidge is elected in 1924, and the economy becomes prosperous. And it is prosperous for almost everybody involved, but the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. It begins to grow this divide that is certainly in the news today, with the 1% owning 99% or whatever it is of the money in the United States. But it led to this time where people were spending money. People had cash. And what were people doing with that cash? They were enjoying themselves. One, they were going to movies. They were buying clothes they liked, right? They were going to sporting events, whatever it was. Two, they were investing. They were trying to make more money for themselves or their grandkids. And so they were investing in stocks. And so with people spending and having income and money, we began with this new idea of an installment plan. An installment plan is basically buying something on credit, right? It's where you go in, you want to buy, today, like mortgages on homes, car payments are the biggest credit, or a loan is the biggest credit-based plan we have, installment plan. Now you can go to Best Buy, and if you have a Best Buy card or a Kohl's card, if you go to Kohl's and you want to buy $500 worth of clothes or whatever you're buying at Kohl's, or you want to go to Best Buy and buy a new TV and an Xbox, that new TV and Xbox may cost you $1,000. You don't have to have $1,000 to own that today or to take it home today, right? You can go in, get on an installment plan, say I got 150, 200 bucks, here's 200 bucks. Okay, you owe us 800 still. We're going to make you pay $15 a month for the next 4 years, whatever, right? But that changed people in the way of what they could purchase, because you didn't have to have the cash now, right? And so how many times over could you pay $20 a month, right? Say 5 things. You buy 5 things that you pay $20 a month. So it's $100 a month to own those 5 things for the next 4 or 5 years until you own it fully, right? So people were like, oh, sweet, right? I can have an Xbox, a TV, new clothes, a dishwasher, and like a dryer for $100 a month. Sure, I'm in. And so people were buying on installment plans, right? And so this is really good for businesses if they pay off the full item, because you get charged interest. So one thing that happens is okay, you're going to pay $20 a month, but $14 of that's going to go towards principal, $6 towards interest. So the store ends up making, say you spend $1,000 on an Xbox and a TV, okay? Over the course of the loan, right, because they're loaning you the money to own that thing, and you're paying it back over 4 or 5 years, however long your terms are, that you're going to pay interest as well, because they're borrowing the money now. And so what they're going to do is, over the 4 or 5 years, you're going to pay interest, and you're going to end up paying $1,400 over the life of the loan. So they're going to make their $1,000 and $400, but you get the casualty of only paying $20 a month, and you get to own it today, right? And so if people pay off their full loan, the business flourishes, and it's a good deal for the person. What happens is when the Great Depression hits, people can't afford to pay it back. And that's when bad things start to happen to the economy. So in this Great Depression era, we started to see signs maybe that, hey, something is wrong. All right, something is wrong. And people didn't want to take heed of them. And we didn't know what the signs were, because we had never had such a prosperous economy that we had never had the subsequent dip. Right? And so today, because we've had depressions and recessions, we have things in place, right? Kind of like this bailout with the money, which I would love to talk about with you guys in class. But this bailout with the $2 trillion bailout President Trump and Congress just signed, it's put in place to make sure the economy doesn't drive down because of this coronavirus shutting down businesses, right? And so people didn't see the signs, and we had nothing in place to help businesses or people, right? And so textile production started to slow down, changing styles, synthetics. Part of it was this idea that we had synthetics. We could make something out of newer material, and that something would last twice as long as the old thing. So we didn't have to make as many of those things, right? Foreign competition, coal mining was down, all of these things. Overproduction in farming led to a drop in crop prices. Housing was down, and all of these things happened to the economy. And what happened is the Black Tuesday, which we're going to talk about just on this slide. Before we get there, we have to talk about the biggest sad boy hours of the Great Depression era, and that is Herbert Hoover, taking the whole yuckity yuck on his face, man. Herbert Hoover gets elected in 1928 as the economy is on its last leg. It's literally on this rickety building and it's shaking. Herbert Hoover takes over, and within weeks of his presidency, a couple months, everything comes crashing down. Part of it was these huge inventories, right? People came out, they went up to a business and they said, "We want to buy one." And the business said, "Sweet, we got one for you." And everybody had money. And somebody came over and saw my new, keyboard, right? And they were like, "Ooh, I want one of those keyboards too." And so they bought one, and then their friends saw it, and everybody says, "Let's all go buy these keyboards." And the keyboard company's thinking, "Holy crap, this is awesome. Let's make 1,000,000 of them." And only 700,000 people bought one. Now they have these huge inventories where demand goes down. People don't need the keyboard anymore. Everybody who wants a keyboard has a keyboard. And that drove prices down. And when you make less money, you can't afford anything, right? So the business would then sell a keyboard for dirt cheap, make no profit, so they can't pay their employees. They can't do all of those things. And eventually, in October 1929, the stock market is going to crash. And people ignored the signs and kept investing money into the stocks. And they were supported by President Herbert Hoover, who actually says that we've passed the worst. And he argued that the economy would fix itself. So people kept continuing to put their faith in American banks and in the stock market. And it actually tanks, right? It's over a couple weekends, but the biggest thing was on Black Tuesday, which we'll talk about on the last point on this slide coming up. People started to buy stocks on margin, which is money that they don't have. And when they purchased things with money that they didn't have, when they needed to pay it back, they didn't have the money. And so businesses crumbled. People's own pocketbooks crumbled. We lose millions and millions of dollars. On October 29th, the stock market crashes. In that 1 week on Black Tuesday, over 30, what is that? 30 billion? Is that, I don't know, 30 billion? Dollars is lost in a single week. We lost, it would be equivalent today, $377,587,332,770. That's exactly what it would be today. $377 billion lost in 1 week of people's money. And so they lost everything. And as soon as this panic happened, people ran to the banks. They fled to the banks and said, "Okay, give me my money." Well, banks don't keep all the money in the bank, right? So when when people came and said, "Give me my money," after a time, the banks had to say, "We don't have your money anymore. We don't have your money." And so people freaked out, and people couldn't get that money back because we didn't have things in place to help people. Like today, we have the FDIC, the Federal Depository Insurance Commission, I believe, that insures your money in the United States Bank up to 250 grand. So if something happens, say the banks close, we go into another depression, you're guaranteed to get 250 grand of your money back, right? Luckily, or not luckily, I guess, but most people don't have that much, but you did. You got that money back. And unemployment shot up. Over 25% of people were unemployed at this time. It was just absolutely brutal. Millions and millions and millions of dollars lost. people's homes, people's lives, people's livelihood, in maybe the most shocking moment in American history, where over the course of a week, $30 billion is lost. And is that hundreds, thousands, millions, billions? Yeah, 30 billion is lost. And so it created this new era, which we'll talk about, dealing with the New Deal and JFK and stuff like, or FDR. Um, but yeah, that's all I got for notes today, guys. We kept it right at 45 minutes, which is good. Make sure you check out the Moodle page to get all of the work that you need to see, what we're going to be doing. And make sure you get it submitted by Thursday. And I will see you in Moodle class on Thursday at our normally scheduled times. Thanks, guys.